happy to be here today at the SAH chapter meeting and holiday gathering. I'm really looking forward to the gift exchange. That's great. I hope you all brought a gift to exchange.
KLG plugs for your Mark 9.
There we go. As Peter mentioned, I'm also the current chair of the SAE Mobility History Committee. And if you haven't had any exposure to that, I kind of like to think of that committee, unlike the other SAE committees, which are primarily standard-setting committees, this committee acts sort of as the SAE historians. And you'll find out today why that's true. I'm pleased to introduce the two gentlemen who are alumni of the British motor industry. As Peter mentioned, both here and in his email, they're here to share their experiences in the automotive business as product engineers in the 50s and 60s at places like Jaguar, Roots Motors, Jensen, and several suppliers. Jaguar also. So our first presenter is Mike Jones, and I'm going to give you, get out of the way here so you can see him. A little bit of biographical information. Mike was born in Leicester, UK in 1936. I hope you don't mind me mentioning. He's a US and UK citizen, married, and has 5 children. Over the long term, he was employed in the UK and South Africa, and has had short-term assignments in France, Italy, and India. Some of the manufacturers that he worked for were Jensen, 2 stints at Jensen, I understand, between 1962 and 1968, and again in 72 to 75. The South Africa assignment included Ford and Leyland, and then Lotus in the 1984 to 1991 time frame. He was employed and lived in the United States from 1991 to 2008 and is currently a resident of Rochester Hills, Michigan. Mike holds a mechanical engineering degree from Coventry University. He was awarded Graduate of the Year by the Institution of Mechanical Engineers, an organization similar to SAE. His pupillage and apprenticeship was served at Humber Limited with the Roots Group, and that was in the mid to late 1950s. And interestingly enough, he met Martin, our second speaker, at that time. He's a fellow of the Institution of Mechanical Engineers in the United Kingdom. Is an active SAE member and also a member of our Mobility History Committee. So I'd like you to please welcome Mike Jones.
When I come nearer to you guys, I've got a very weak voice, and probably better in the middle. Well, thank you for having me. Thank you in particular, Bob. It's actually very flattering to be asked, not only because of my age, but you guys don't know an awful lot about British cars, and yet I'm always surprised that some of you do. I mean, this guy in particular, Peter, he knows a lot more about British cars than I do. Ask him about Morris Minors and Austin Wolseley's. He knows it all.
Lee Francis Links.
I'm serious. He's very well informed, and I've come across a few Americans like that. I'm always surprised. So, what I'm going to do, I think there's limited time, so I'm relying on Bob to tell me to shut up when the time comes. But I'm going to do a little overview first. We've got some pictures to show, but there may not be time to show them all. But I'm going to give you an overview of what I'd like to cover. As Len said, I've had 2 stints at Jensen. The first being an intro to a Ford Tiger. How many of you guys have heard of Tiger? Anybody? Wow, lots of you know. It's a Ford V8 engine in an Alpine, or it used to be an Alpine. A lot of messing about to make it a marriage, but anyway, I worked on that for about 2 years, and I'll maybe show you a few pictures. When I arrived on the scene, Jensen had just finished the 1800. Anyone know that thing? Good, the Volvo, yeah, that's it. Pretty good. And there was then vacant space. The Volvo project wasn't a very happy one. It was a bit silly when you think about it. It was designed in Sweden. The body was built in Scotland. It was then shipped down to West Bromwich, in the middle of England. And then it was shot up to the dealers, mostly back in Sweden. So it was a crazy arrangement, but as a result, the quality was pretty bad, especially during the transportation process. Austin Healy was the breadwinner for Jensen for about 8-9 years. They made the body, they painted it, they trimmed it, and they trucked it off to Longbridge. You've heard of Longbridge?
Yep.
Well, you would have done. And then the mechanicals went in there, but that kept Jensen going for a long, long time. They never made any money out of their own cars, we'll talk about later. The real money makers were Healy, P800, and the Tiger. And that was really the way that they stayed alive for probably 10, 15 years, even though the bad times came later. When I rolled up at Jensen, my first role in life was to do the chassis work on Tiger, so that kept me occupied for quite a long time. But then my boss, Kevin Beattie, who we're going to hear about later, he was the chief engineer, and he put me onto the four-wheel drive program. At that time, it wasn't intended to make a four-wheel drive Interceptor, which was the steel body. We started with the plastic body, CB8. Anybody know about the CB8?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's a funny looking vehicle, started by Eric Neal. But as a vehicle, it was a terrific vehicle. It was very heavy. So it went like along with this Trider's left 6.2 engine. On the voice going already. You have to sit here then.
You see over here.
Can you guys hear? Yeah, they have to.
Okay.
You have to bring your death so the CB8 you can get either manual or automatic, and I used to love driving that thing, especially with the manual. It was a real performer, but it had the peculiar dual headlights up front, and it was openly criticised. The reason it looked so ugly was because it was actually designed to have covers rather like the E-Type. And because the light vision, the lighting was so terrible, the boss of Jensen, Richard Jensen, found that insisted these covers should come off, and thereafter it was rather ugly with the supercar. Anyway, we got on to making the CB8 into a four-wheel drive, and that's when the fun started. And a guy called Brian Spicer, the development person from Dunlop, who had been making anti-skid brakes, he was imported from Dunlop to Jensen, and he was the development guy on the all-wheel drive version, and I was the drawing up this design guy, and particularly chassis. So Brian and I did a lot of work on this thing. We did a lot of road testing to make it work. Thanks to people like the Road Research Laboratory in Bristol in the UK, where there were lots of different road surfaces, and they also had areas where they could spray certain parts of the track. So that's where we did all our fine-tuning of the so-called Maxeret. Anybody heard of Maxeret? You're well informed. Have you lived in England?
Yes.
You have, okay. Maxeret, I won't go into detail, but it's a fascinating story. It really started with aircraft, as some of you may know. It was a Dunlop design, and the big difference between the car and an aircraft was the aircraft had a full power hydraulic system, which operated the brakes, obviously. We had a vacuum control system, which I'll talk about later at this time. But the reason Brian Spicer was appointed to Jensen was he was a Dunlop man. So he knew a lot of people who mattered, and we in fact started with done-off brakes, we're going to get it later on. So we were able to develop this thing all within a year. The first thought it was wonderful. They'd never driven all-wheel drive with anti-skid braking. We used to get very annoyed later on that Audi claimed to be the first with all-wheel drive, which they weren't. They came 16 years after us, and they of course had all the publicity with their rally cars. We didn't share that glory, but nevertheless we were the first. In fact, Jensen used to boast about being first in many things. They were the first to fit seat belts on the so-called 541, which is the car that preceded the CBA. And they were the first with disc brakes, only just. Your old Jaguar followed production a couple of weeks later, but we were the first. So Jensen brothers, who started the company, were always trying to do new things, and this Ferguson system was an example of that. And many people have since said we were crazy because it was new and we didn't have the resources to do anything really clever, but nevertheless we had to go. You probably know there was an attempt to replace the CV8, it was called the P66, designed by Eric Neal. To me, a ridiculous looking car. It just didn't look right to me. It had a smaller fiber engine, the D and rear axle which didn't work, it was too heavy and too costly. And thank the Lord, Jensen never made that thing. We made 2 prototypes, but the reaction when it was shown at Earl's Court, the showplace in England in those days, none of the public liked it, so it was dropped. And then came the Interceptor, which some of you may have seen. That was Kevin Beated answer to, if you like, a mediocre sale record of the CD8. The idea was to retain the CD8 chassis and later the four-wheel drive chassis, and then put this Italian body onto it. It was initially designed by Touring, you may have heard of in Italy. So later on, we went to Vignale to make the thing. And really, there wasn't a lot of engineering involved for Jensen. Vignale did a fabulous job within about, I think it was 9 months. They had a chassis in January of '66, and by October, they had 3 vehicles for us for the Oscar show. It was a pretty good go. They did the tooling, they did the design. When I went over there, I was surprised how little drawings they had. But they were real artisans, and they were working with Maserati and Fiat. So they knew bodies, and they had a flair for doing clever things with their hands. So they did a remarkable job. The downside was that the first 40 vehicles did have quality problems, which we sent 40 chassis to them, which is obviously a messy way of building cars. They pumped the body on a production basis, shipped them back to England, and then we distributed. And then later on, we had this arduous task of transferring the tooling from Italy, the production tooling, and also the various hardware bits and pieces, door handles and dashes and so over to England. And it was a progressive thing rather than an overnight thing, and it looked it could be a bunch of quality problems. So that's broadly Jensen. I did go back to them in '75, and it doesn't need a lot of talking about it, because Jensen was on the downhill. I didn't know when I was interviewed. I was persuaded to join them because my boss, Beatty, was apparently in line to become managing director, and they didn't tell me this. But after 3 months, I went to be issued as chief engineer. But the idea was that I was going to run the engineering side for 2 new programs, one called the F-Type, which was a replacement for the Interceptor, and also a Galway vehicle called the G-Type. And you see a picture this time of both those. But they never went into production. So I began to think I was a bit of a spare part. I spent most of my time arguing with Lotus about engine problems. By then, Jensen nearly was in production. When I'd been away from Jensen, this thing had been designed and developed. When I returned, it was just coming out of the factory, but full of problems. So I was given the job of trying to sort out the engineering problems, mainly Lotus engine, and also maintaining the drawing office in terms of getting all the drawings out and talking to suppliers and so on. So the Jensen healing was born, and it had a very sad life for years. So in 74, 75, Jensen was beginning to go downhill pretty fast, and the seal was brought in, and not many people knew about it actually. It was a sort of secret. We didn't tell the workers in the plant. It's been frightened in the union, but nevertheless it dragged on for about a year. And Cavalli, anybody heard of Cavalli?
Show them out.
He was basically a salesman, and he bought a share into Gibson and finally owned it. And there's been a little resentment about Cavalli, because although Jensen was a big money support, he refused the government loan from the USA. That was the time when the British car industry was going down and down and down, especially British Labour, head of them. And Jensen was one of them. And I think the Jaguar Martin said it was in the time. So it was very sad that the company could not be retained. I had a great time there. And the people I worked with mostly were enthusiasts. And the sad thing was that when it closed, a lot of expertise went. We had very good sheet metal workers, pattern makers, people like that. And those aren't so a penny. You can't get those off the street. You know, they're offering father to son, to son and so on. So we lost about 50 very good people at this when it closed. So there was a lot of business. Cavalli publicly claimed that Jensen was full of lazy people and incompetent. He even had a go at engineering, which to you who are engineers will know their background. In those days we had to do physical crash tests. We'd build a car and crash it. And of course, that's a big investment. So we crashed the F-type, which I mentioned earlier, the interceptor replacement. And this thing failed. It passed the roof crash test, which is pretty difficult. But it failed only just from getting on another one. And Cavalli basically said, well, you can't fail. No, why didn't you pass? Whereas typically in the industry then, you probably need about 20, 30 prototypes. Admittedly missing all the trim, but you had to have all the mechanicals in to do these crashes. Nowadays you can do it all on a computer. In those days it was physical crash. So we weren't at all perturbed with the first one crashing, but another two bodies in line doing more crashing, but you wouldn't let us do it. So that program was canned very early on in my return. And likewise the D-type was canned, that's the one that goes indoors. So I'm not going to talk Lotus, unless you really want me to, but I'd like to just show a few pictures. Can we go to Jensen pictures? Sorry, that's the other one. Now Bob's going to be, I hope, able to save you embarrassment. Can you still hear? My voice is gradually going. Now some of these you may think are insignificant. Well, that wasn't going to be shown. I used to go to work in that in my first few weeks. That was my first step.
Nice
And
car.
The only part of the story that you may want to hear is my boss, BT, used to live in the same town as me. And I'd leave normal working time. And I'd go what I thought was the quick way through the middle of Birmingham to get to West Brom, place of work. And he'd go the long way around on the top of Birmingham. But I used to arrive before him. He was a 500cc, which did about 50 miles an hour. And he with his large Jensen with its 6-litre engine would go and sometimes arrive at work after me. And he never said anything, and I could see what he was thinking. So here we go. The next one is J3, yes, water. Next one.
J3?
J18, no, sorry, J18, was that one. Okay, can you go down to show these? I've only put this up because we're squashed up by the noted everybody's thin. These two on the left and to the right, they were brothers, and they started Jensen in about 1932. So Jensen has a long history, I'm not going to go into it here. But they were, if you like, the original enthusiastic people who would buy a chassis from somebody and put a body on it. You did a lot of Austin 7 conversions. Anybody heard of an Austin 7?
Oh, yeah.
So that's how they started. And they did quite well. And then they impressed the chief engineer of Standard, who then got them into making more complex bodies. And eventually they were exporting, admittedly, very few special bodies with American Ford engines. And this was all pre-war. And then they got into making commercial vehicles and military vehicles in war. And then after the war, they returned to making cars. Can we do the next one? So that's the sort of car they were building before and after the war. I think that's convertible, the others are spare. So you probably will laugh at these things, but that's what they were making in those days. And they were obviously selling to fairly wealthy people. They weren't mass market by any means, but they were making about 2 a week of those. Austin engine, bit of Austin. 6-cylinder Austin. Same gearbox, suspension from Austin. And if you know the Austin range, the Austin Princess after the war was the source of many mechanical components. Next one, Bob, please. Sorry, that's the one I was talking about. There we are. That's That's Richard Jensen. He was the outgoing guy. His brother was the clever man who did a lot of the engineering. But the two of them made an excellent pair, almost like the Wright brothers in a funny sort of way. You know, they were a strong family, united, and they worked very well together. There's Clark there, but that's the Ford engine I was telling you about. So that was done before the war again. Anybody recognise him? Yeah, I'm impressed. I mean, all of it.
Like, quick question. Was the engineering done in inches or centimeters?
Mostly inches. Actually, in those days, the Brits had this crazy operation involving metric for body and so-called sterling for chassis and engine. So you can imagine
the same program.
You can imagine a poor mechanic working on one. You'd have 2 sets of wrenches. We've seen that. Can we work? Sorry. Now that's the 501 I was talking about. Quite a nice looking car. That preceded the CB8. This was the one that had seat belts and disc brakes and all this odd little rotating front. This was to accommodate the cooling system. A very good idea in principle, because you probably know if you open up and allow air to go in, you increase the drag of the car. If you close it, the drag goes down. So the idea was that you'd only drop this front down when you're either in traffic, and then when you're going fast, you'd seal the front. So nothing that clever, but nobody else did it. So that was another first that was done by Jensen. Okay, next one. I put this up because Jensen couldn't afford advertising, so they had to do it by odd promotional things. And this was a CB8, which on its 3rd trial managed to break a record. This was on a road circuit. Senator, everybody heard of that?
Yes. Sure.
Well, we chose this track, and the first 2 times we failed to complete the distance because we had wheel failure, fatigue. But the 3rd time we managed to beat, guess what, a Ford Cortina. But that, in those days, was a very quick car. That was a...
Was it a Lotus Cortina, right?
Yeah, it got camshaft, overhead camshafts. It was a quick car. And this thing did an average of 80 miles an hour, 24 hours, which is quite an achievement. We stopped every 2 hours, changes of brakes and refuel, and we employed professional drivers. And it was then that I acquired great respect for these racing drivers, because they were driving in the night, through the night, with mediocre headlights, and they did virtually the same speed at night as they did in the daytime. Okay, can we go to the next one? So that was Snapchat. And this is, I think, this is the 1800. You've seen that? You recognise it?
Oh, yes.
That's the short building.
Next one.
Very heavy car.
Now I put that up because that, surprisingly, is the basis of the Sunbeam Tiger. It shared the same underfloor and the same wheelbase and the same track. Anybody recognise that thing? There was an estate car in the van version, and that was the van. So that's how the Tiger started, believe it or not. Next one, please.
Tiger was
58,
64.
59. 58, 59. Now that's the Tiger production line, that's with the V8 engine, nothing much to see, but otherwise it's an Alpine. It was virtually the same in appearance as Alpine, and the nice thing about it was what we call a Q car. Nobody recognised it as a Tiger, so the traffic lights, people thought they were sitting by a gutless Alpine. But with this V8 engine you could impress all your friends with it. Next one. We did a series too. That was a better version. And a much better car around, 14-inch wheels. But sadly, because of the Chrysler purchase of Roots, it was never in production of any number. There were a few made, but it didn't get anywhere. And we went to Le Mans. When I say we, that was really a Roots enterprise. It didn't do very well. The lesson to learn there is, I think Jaguar had the same lesson. You've got to prepare for these events. You can't just roll up and hope to finish a 24-hour event. The engines had been prepared by Shelby, and unfortunately they blew up, and there was a big lawsuit afterwards. But basically, it was predictable. I put this up because the Tiger was really strange engineering. We had negative Ackerman. Who knows what Ackerman is? Right, well, it's a form of steering geometry. Essentially, it's to have the inner wheel turning sharper than the outer wheel. Now, this thing had to toe in on full load. The reason being we couldn't get the rack further back. We wanted to have a new cross member, that thing here, but Roots wouldn't let us do it. If we moved the rack back, we could have achieved sensible geometry. Sorry?
I never heard of a car with negative Ackerman.
No, well, this is probably one of the first. Surprisingly, Roots accepted it. I mean, they basically duplicated what we did, but in more detail. They did endurance testing and whatnot. We essentially did the engineering and the build, but Roots took over for testing. And none of their drivers complained, but we never heard anybody complaining in service. I've only got one little thought. I'm glad to see this finally happen. I go to Jensen clubs occasionally, and I met one guy who actually got correct by the new cross member. So that was just wonderful to me, because that was what we wanted back in the 50s, but we went ahead to do it. So it is possible. You just got to screw around the cross member. Next one, please. Now I put that up simply because canard rods, they're a dubious advantage. The reason I've shown it is we actually put it the other way around eventually. We mounted, instead of on this side, we mounted on the other. And the reason being that the handling of the live axle, especially with power, is certainly not symmetrical. We have essentially oversteer on a right-hand bend and a bit of understeer on a left-hand bend. And that was all thanks to prop shaft tools. Now to some extent, the canard rock, if you swap it, changes the roll centre. When you go to the right, the roll centre drops, and when you go to the left, the roll centre rises. And this, to some extent, compensated for the prop shaft tool. We never did a patent on that because it was almost so obvious, but we later changed the CV8s to swap the canard rod as well for the same reason. And also, we had trouble with wind-up. We didn't use traditional anti-trap valves, but we did have trap in the early days. And again, just to show how crude we were in terms of engineering, in order to witness this tram, we dug a hole after the seats on the floor so that we could see the drive line and the rear axle. So when it was tramping, we could see how it was tramping, and my boss would do the driving and I would do the steering and I would the camera. And eventually the cure was to put snubber rubbers. Can we go back quickly? To put snubbers on the springs, and it worked surprisingly well. And it cost us, I think, all of 50 cents. We put them here. They're not shown here because they're a late intro, but what it really did was to stop the leaf spring S-bending under full torque, as you can probably imagine. These springs don't stay looking like that. They go into a funny S. And the idea of the snubber rubber, which snubbed onto the chassis frame, would essentially reduce the amount of S-bending. It worked. So we're all very proud of that. Next one, please. I think we've had enough of Tiger. Can we leap ahead a bit? And I think you're going to shut me up soon. Yeah, now that's, anyone been to Goodwood? That was our Interceptor with a four-wheel drive, with my boss driving it. So, the little story behind that is that after announcement, we got the press to drive these cars at Goodwood, and everything went well in the morning. Nobody did anything silly, and they were all pleased with the car. And we showed four-wheel drive to its advantage on grass. It was a dry day, so you couldn't really see the difference on the track. But of course, guess what? After lunch and after the drinking, then we had fun and games. And we had one guy go off and he damaged his car. But it just made a lesson to us that if you do it for a journalist, expect him to drink. That was a mistake, but luckily we survived that one. Can we go to the next? Now this car was built in parallel to the Interceptor. That's the two-wheel drive version, the one with the big window. This didn't drive as well as the CV8, although it had the same chassis. The back window upset the fore-and-aft weight distribution. So I wouldn't say it was tail heavy, but it certainly behaved differently to the CV8. And so we had to jack up the rear springs a bit, we had to change the fore-and-aft brake ratio, because the early cars, the front brakes tended to lock, so we had to put more load or braking load on the back to change the bias. And it certainly handled a bit differently, and not so nice as the CV8. But otherwise, it was a pretty car, steel body, no longer fiberglass, and typical Italian approach to corrosion. We did have corrosion in the early days, and they really didn't bother dipping sheet steel into an anti-corrosive material. So the best cars tended to run just 40. Next one, please.
The wheels are quite nice, aren't they?
Yeah, they're made by Rostar. Sank down to wash. Yeah, they quite nice. Then that's a convertible. This is on my watch. Jensen weren't very adept at convertibles, but they had made a few. And this was aimed, as you see, the horsey people. More expensive than the sedan. But I learned an awful lot about Lucas Micros, which is...
Mike, was that all fiberglass?
No, that's steel.
That's steel,
It's
okay.
the same body as the one we just seen,
Okay.
the sedan. But obviously the top was a lot tougher. We had to strengthen the structure to stop the dreaded strip thing. But in the end we got a stiff car, and it worked very well, and the sealing was pretty good. But the actuation system, this was one of again, an attempt to be clever. We wanted to have an automatic one that goes up and down, rather than a manual one, which is traditional to the Brits. We wanted to be clever and have it automatic, and it's not that simple. So it's a combination of hydraulics and electrics, and it needed a lot of clever assembly. We had to employ skilled people, and we I think made about 1 a week. It was employed. Well, they all came to the States. The Americans loved it, especially California. And you can still these things around in very small numbers. But that's the way you convert from a sedan to a convertible. So that kept me quite busy. Next one, please. I think this is a revamped one. This I saw at one of the Jensen clubs about 3 years ago. It's still running, that's the point I'm trying to make. I'm just amazed. I mean, when you've been involved in the engineering, you never expect these things to last 3 or 4 years. You think, well, 5 years is nice, 10 years is a miracle, especially the British. But this thing, it's done about 300,000 miles, apparently on the same engine. I find it hard to believe that the guy can still drive the parts, obviously prior to the dealers here. So he is as happy as or whatever you call it. So they do exist even now. And most of them are on the West Coast, where they were sold in number. The Cavalli man who owned Jensen, I mentioned him at the beginning, he started his life in San Francisco. And that's where they are in general. There's another pretty view, nothing to say about that, just a dual tone, different colour at the top. Quite an example. Let's go right to the end, because I think I'm running out of steam, especially for my audience. Can we go to the last two? Following the interceptor, I mentioned earlier, when I arrived on the scene, we made sheet metal versions of this thing, and that's the so-called G-type. It's going to have 2 engines, a Lotus engine, believe it or not, the front end and the boats can be sorted out, and also a V8. Gullwing, styled by a guy called William Towns, and it's ex-roommate of mine. And can we go to the next one? But that never saw the light of day because of Harley and the scoring of the company. Well, there's a Gullwing, and then can you go back a couple? I'm going to show the F-type. I was saying to Martin before we came, Gullwings look pretty, but they're very practical. If the car rolls over, you can't get out. If you park near a wall, you can't get the doors. And I'm amazed at the DeLoreans. We don't get so many with that known defect. I mean, even the old Mercedes got criticised for that very thing. Well, that was, we're going back a bit now, that's Jensen Healy. It just shows you a small group of people. That was my development shop, and they made this thing in 6 months. It's just amazing what you can do. I mean, this was really all handmade. The body panels were mostly hand bashed. They went on tooling, and everything was made in that shop, apart from the engine and the mechanical stuff. Had a lot of Vauxhall bits, Vauxhall reactor, Vauxhall bits suspension. I hate to admit all this, but it's so crude. Vauxhall front suspension. So So all Jensen did was really logic. So when you think of what Jaguar did, Jaguar designed the engine.
Right, oh, yes.
Yes. Skips. They designed the gearbox. They race suspension, Jensen can do that. Most of the body people. I wanted to show the F-type, but we've done the last three. That's the one, that's it. Now that's the one that was crashed, that's the so-called interceptor replacement. We were not going to make a full-wheel drive version of that. So when I rolled up at Jensen for the second stint, I thought, well, maybe I need to be involved in another interesting program. But it was cancelled. So all I saw were 3 or 4 sheet metal bodies lying around and a broken car where the front end had been bashed in. So that never happened. That was again starred by William Towns. He did that funny looking Aston Martin,
Yes,
which
yeah.
he made out.
The Lugano, yeah.
Yeah, I
Lugano
always think
saloon.
it's made of cardboard. It's just got very curves, so it's mostly false. But
Yeah.
anyway, he made his name in that thing, and he even did the Aston Martin BBS. He actually worked for Aston Martin. So, having been a roommate, I was just amazed that he became famous because when I knew him, he wasn't a very, shall we say, remarkable guy. He was could play the piano quite well, and he could drink quite well, and he was the one who had all the money. He actually had a Rolls Royce and a Vincent. He had all the best transport amongst the other students, thanks to his parents. But he never looked to be, as we thought, famous, but he got famous. I think you're going to hear Lotus later on if you want to, but I think you've had enough. So I apologise for it being a bit, shall we say, informal. I didn't think